Hi, everyone. My name is Mady Beckner, and I'm graduating from the Duke Masters of Statistical Science program, class of 2022. So I'm making this recording of my MSS portfolio presentation to share as an example for future students. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope you find this useful. So let's go ahead and get started and share my screen. Okay, so this is my master's portfolio poster. My topic was estimating North Pacific right whale density using machine learning methods. So this was actually a capstone project. So I collaborated with several data science students, as well as 2 professors and a PhD student at MIT Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. And our client was Dr. Catherine Bertrock, who is a research scientist at NOAA. So the main goal of this project was really to create a modeling pipeline that could be used in future work for NOAA and their future research. So let's go ahead and get started. So the eastern population of the North Pacific right whale is the most endangered large whale population, with an estimated only 31 members remaining in their population in the Bering Sea. That being said, this estimate is outdated and it's considered unreliable for use in marine mammal stock management, which our client NOAA is tasked with doing. So through this capstone project, we propose a novel and improved approach for constructing density estimates for this endangered population through passive acoustic data modeling. So some key terms. This project has a fair amount of background knowledge in ecology, physics, signal processing, and more. So these key terms might help a little bit in better understanding our goal in this project, as well as the challenges we faced. So first off, what kinds of whale calls are we talking about? So gunshot calls are short impulsive signals produced by all species of right whale. We are going to be using gunshots for our study for a few reasons. One being that these signals are produced frequently by North Pacific right whales. Additionally, these signals have been earmarked for our data by NOAA analysts. So we have binomial presence data in 3-minute bins. And lastly, gunshots possess a quality that allow us to produce range estimates for them. So in other words, we can produce a distance estimate from the whale to the hydrophone recorder at the time of the signal emission. So that is very valuable. This quality that I'm talking about is called dispersion. So dispersed gunshots are calls with more than one mode due to the acoustic interaction with the seabed and sea surface in shallow water. So our goal in modeling is going to be to classify gunshots as dispersed or non-dispersed, and then range the dispersed calls. Because if you remember, we can only range the calls that are dispersed. So a spectrogram is a visual representation of sound, and this is the way that we are plotting these signals for visual interpretation. So spectrograms are constructed by plotting the frequency on the y-axis with time on the x-axis. And the amplitude or loudness is represented as the intensity or color at each point in the image. So let's go through these figures. So figure A, this is a spectrogram with no apparent signal here. So this might just be some like background ocean noise. In figure B, this is a spectrogram of a non-dispersed gunshot call. So if you remember, the x-axis is time. So you can tell it's a very short signal. The y-axis is frequency, and then the loudness is the color. So you can tell it's a very loud, short signal. That being said, it's only got one mode, which is the line right there. So this is a non-dispersed gunshot call. And then figure C, we have our dispersed gunshot call. And you can tell because it's got multiple modes, which are those lines. So figure C is the type of call that we can produce a range estimate for. And lastly, so that process through which we can produce a range estimate for a signal is called warping. And warping is a nonlinear physics-based signal processing tool. This is actually, so warping is a bit difficult to do manually and time intensive. So in order to create labels for our real data using warping, it takes a very long time. And I will talk a little bit more about the challenges there in a second. So our data, we have two data sets that I'll be referencing throughout this talk. The first one is our observed in situ passive acoustic data. So NOAA has provided acoustic recordings from 6 recorders stationed in the Pacific and subarctic. And these locations were chosen because they overlap with known or presumed feeding areas of North Pacific right whales. So the data span 9 years, and we have over 20 terabytes of acoustic data. So in this figure, you can see these are the locations of moorings in the Bering Sea. So we have a lot of observed acoustic data, but we do not have labels for the observed data. So we don't have recorded labels of the type of call or the range estimate of the call. And because warping is so time intensive, we were not able to manually generate a training data or validation data set with enough labels of range estimates for us to use. So that's where the synthetic data set comes into play. We have synthetic simulated data provided by MIT Woods Hole that we use to train our model. So this data was created through their algorithm Kraken by generating spectrograms from different configurable parameters such as modes, frequency, sound speed, and seabed. And they tried to make it so that they were the conditions that would be present in the Bering Sea. So here we have 2 rounds of synthetic data. The first row is the first round that was created. And as you can see, it's very simplistic. The gunshot calls are very different from the no gunshot calls. So you would expect an algorithm to be able to classify the difference between these two extremely easily. The main issue with this is that it's not going to be able to capture the chaos and like random noise that's inherent to real ocean data. So if we train this model on this data and deploy it on real ocean data, we would not expect the model to perform well at all. We do have a second round of augmented synthetic data, which we ended up like transferring all of our training to this data set because it's more realistic. So again, our collaborators at MIT Woods Hole went in and added different random noise, noise that would be present in the Bering Sea, other animal sounds, changed the location of the call, different things that would better replicate a real signal from the ocean. So at the point of this project, we have results on the first round of data and preliminary results on the second. Since then, we've kind of scrapped the original round and produced a lot more on the second round of data, but I'll be presenting the results that I had at the time of this presentation. So let's see, now we have our methods. So the method we used for training is the multi-output convolutional neural network. So we use a multi-output neural network because we have to both identify and classify the gunshot calls as dispersed or not. And then we also have a regression problem, which is generating the range estimates for the dispersed gunshots. So we present results here on a simple CNN architecture, a ResNet 19 architecture on the original synthetic data, and then preliminary results from our augmented data on a simple CNN. So this table shows our simple CNN architecture. We used cross entropy loss for our classification loss, and we used MSE for the range. This is kind of our first round of results on that simplistic data. So as you can see, it performs extremely well. That's because it's validated and trained on that simplistic data. So I'm presenting these results because this was an important step in transitioning to a more complex model and more complex data. But this is exactly what we would expect for this data set because it is generated the same way and it's pretty simplistic. So it performs extremely well. Then we also have results from the CNN using augmented synthetic data. The architecture was similar for the simplistic CNN, but with a different image size for the data set. So accuracy is a tiny bit lower, but still very high, and loss is still very low, but a tiny bit higher. And here are those plots again. And essentially what we ended up doing is continuing the work on the augmented data. We also implemented ResNet on the augmented data, but I think the more simplistic model is actually kind of the best choice, because we will be deploying this on a novel data set, one that's not synthetic. So we don't want it to overfit, which is why like a deeper neural network wouldn't really be the right choice here. So yeah, future work. We are in the process of creating our labeled validation set of the real data so that we can test how it's doing on the real data before deploying it. In order to do that, we need to classify the gunshot calls as well as manually warp them, which takes a lot of time. So that's still in the works. And we used several different methods for doing the classification. One was creating a Shiny app, which allows the user to plot spectrograms, manually click the time of the call, and then classify it. And that was presented as an alternative to Raven, which is a tool for signal processing developed by physicists. It's not open source, so this was the reason we tried using Shiny. Raven is a little bit better in terms of creating very clear spectrograms, so that's what we ended up using. So after we have all the spectrograms from the label data, we will test that and develop the model as needed. So our future modeling work, besides what I have been saying, is tuning, architecture experimentation on the real data set, as well as the issue of dealing with multiple whale calls. So we may want to incorporate a object detection algorithm such as YOLO to create bounding boxes within the spectrograms. Additionally, we would also like to experiment with self-supervised methods or unsupervised methods in order to kind of see the types of calls that kind of naturally split from the algorithm. So some limitations and challenges, I kind of touched on these, but size of the data just presented some challenges in terms of storage and tuning. We ended up using AWS S3 for storing and SageMaker for modeling. The ability to create labeled data was the main issue because we had challenges with warping and application development. And then our main challenge is that the model may suffer when applied to the complexities and real ocean data. But ultimately, I think this project has been a very valuable exploration in how to rework density estimation in ecology using machine learning and passive acoustic data modeling. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and good luck with your posters. Thank you.